To Canberra now, where we're joined by the re-elected, reinstated Attorney General, Christian Porter. Thanks for joining us, Christian.
Thanks for the invite.
Congratulations, firstly, on getting re-elected in your own seat in Western Australia. It was seen as a tight contest, of course, and you got a swing to you over there. You've also picked up another portfolio, not as if the Attorney General's portfolio is not wide-ranging enough. You've picked up industrial relations. How are you going to marry the two of those?
Well, I think that industrial relations has an inherently legal character. For instance, when we were looking at amendments to the Sex Discrimination Act around religious freedom and the necessity to better balance the ways in which that act worked, that also had repercussions for the Fair Work Act. So there is a lot of legal crossover. Obviously, it's a significant economic issue as well, and it's one of those issues and one of those portfolios where I think striking the right balance is always the art.
Yeah, look, it's a fascinating portfolio because in many ways it is always a key area of reform that coalition supporters, some coalition MPs, some of the business groups, they expect reform in this area from coalition governments. They haven't seen a lot in recent years. And there's already calls from business groups for you to do more in unfair dismissal laws and the overhauling of enterprise bargaining arrangements. Do you think that there are adjustments that need to be made? Will you be looking to be a reformist minister in that area during this term?
Well, look, I don't want to get ahead of the briefs which have literally just arrived, but those organisations that you've just mentioned, of course, they'll be very high on my list of organisations to speak to, as will serious members of the union movement. So I think this is an issue and an area where striking the right balance has always been the art for the government of the day, but there are always ways in which you can improve the relationship between employers and unions representing employees in a way that benefits both. And I would sort of offer the observation that Australia has now soundly rejected class warfare, divisions being created between employers and employees, between different levels of income earning on the tax scale, and we've soundly rejected an agenda that divides Australia. So this is a portfolio where when you do look at ways in which to improve relations, they have to be genuine improvements that work for everyone, and everyone's interests should align in having greater job growth, greater economic opportunity and the ability to live in an aspirational way and do better for you and your family.
Indeed, this is one area that hasn't really been discussed enough in the wash-up from the election, because you had a very, very strong union campaign spending a lot of money and investing a lot of resources in the Change the Rules campaign, focusing on industrial relations. Now, to me, it always seemed rather ironic that the rules that they were looking to change are the Fair Work laws that were brought in under a Labor government. And every time Bill Shorten railed against penalty rate changes, they were penalty rates introduced by the independent umpire that Labor put in place, the Fair Work Commission. So do you expect that the union movement will continue this Change the Rules campaign, or are they going to accept the fact that this largely is an industrial relations system at the moment that was designed by the Rudd and Gillard governments?
Well, look, perhaps the other irony is that Sally McManus, who designed and championed that Change the Rules campaign, herself takes the view that the rules need not apply to her or unions that she has responsibility for, insofar as she says that unions should be able to break laws that they don't like. As you note, that the fundamental architecture of the system was that designed by the Labor Party, the Labor movement and unions some time ago. So there are a number of ironies here, and I think indeed Sally McManus has said that that campaign didn't resonate for the union movement. And I think the reason why is because that campaign sought to divide employers from employees and vice versa, and having the strength of understanding that there has to be benefit and uplift for both sides. For this to be a portfolio area, there has to be types of reforms that deliver for everyone. And that should always be the starting point. And I think one of the things that we've seen recently with that Change the Rules campaign is a denial of the idea that what is good for employers and employees is very often the same thing.
A lot of right-of-centre commentators during the campaign, respected commentators, noted that there was not enough of a focus from either side in a productivity reform agenda. I mean, that's where the economy needs to modernise. That's how you're going to get higher wages and greater national wealth. Do you think this is something that you and the other economic ministers need to focus on? And obviously you want to keep unemployment low, but you need to deal with the pretty sluggish wages growth, if for no other reason than the fact that it feeds into discontent in the electorate.
Yeah, well, I think there's some common sense and truth in that. And obviously, again, the recent election was an endorsement of orthodox economics, returning a budget to surplus, delivering growth that translates into job growth. And obviously, from that job growth, we want to see competition for workers that will drive wages up. But as you note, it is a continual design and responsibility of governments, particularly centre-right governments, to ensure that productivity increases so that we are competitive in our region, but also globally. So that is a portfolio responsibility that sits across a number of important key portfolios, but of course industrial relations is one of those.
Tell us about the mood inside that coalition party room today. This morning, the joint party room meeting, you've all got together the first time. When you left Canberra, I mean, let's be honest, when you left Canberra to go off and fight this election, you would have been worried that you might not even come back to Parliament House except to clear out your office, and many of your own colleagues would have had the same fears. Tell us what it was like to get back together again. Well,
you know, there was always a path to win this election, and that was a narrow path, and the path relied on us selling economic orthodoxy and our credentials in having performed economically for all Australians over the last 6 years. Look, I would describe the mood as obviously positive, but I think that a lesson that everyone learned was that Labor got very, very far ahead of themselves, took a whole range of outcomes for granted, and at the end of the day, government is here to serve the best interests of the Australian people, and we think that we did that over the last 6 years, produced record job growth, 100,000 jobs for 18 to 24-year-olds last year, which is a record in Australia's economic history. But it is a very sobering experience when you're re-elected because you know that you've got a massive job of work to do because people have put their faith in us as a government and as individual members of Parliament to produce better results for them and their families. And those results have to be in job growth, in ensuring that aspirations can be met and that there are pathways to always do better. So obviously the tax cuts is going to be very key to the next several weeks of our first sitting when we come back for the next couple of weeks.
What do you reckon Scott Morrison means by burning for the Australian public?
Well, I think it's about the service aspect of public service. I mean, I've just gone through several weeks, months and 3 years of marginal seat campaigning, and people put a lot of faith in their elected member of Parliament and obviously their executive government. But I think that it's a way of the Prime Minister expressing what he expressed in the party room, which is it's not about us being in government so much as us being in government for people. The purpose of us being here is that people have put faith in us as a government, and I think that that faith is well-deserved in many respects because we've delivered economic outcomes that we said we would deliver. I mean, when we came to office in 2013, many of the same commentators who were writing us off at the last election wrote off the notion that we could produce more than 1 million jobs, but we did it, and we did it before time. So now the pledge to further that job growth with 1.25 million jobs is a massive responsibility. And delivering on that responsibility and that undertaking, as we have done, makes the difference for the kids in all of the families in my electorate when they come out of school or TAFE or university, that they've got fulfilling, meaningful, productive roles and jobs available in their home states and in their geographic region. So it's a massive responsibility, but one I believe that we can undertake, and we've got a track record in this area.
Now, in your role as Attorney-General, there are always challenges, but one I think that we spoke about recently, of course, is the need to legislate religious freedom. Very difficult to codify the competing rights here for religious freedom and freedom of expression, and therefore, and there's a lot to proceed with there. I think another issue that's going to obviously have some input from you is constitutional reform and the continued push for the voice to Parliament, the Uluru statement from the heart, activism from Indigenous groups, from the Labor Party still, from some media groups. I think what's interesting about this is your West Australian colleague, Ken Wyatt, who's taken on the Indigenous Affairs portfolio, he has not, he's not been dismissive of the voice to Parliament. He's not been definitive in saying that that idea can't work. Of course, Malcolm Turnbull had dismissed it, as did Tony Abbott. Do you think there's potential to work through those issues and think about some Indigenous voice to Parliament in the future?
Well, look, just dealing with the first of those issues on religious freedoms, of course, we undertook, and it was election policy, to produce a religious discrimination bill and move it through Parliament so that it becomes an act. And as you note, there are complexities in that, but anti-discrimination legislation is not magical and it's not unknown to Australian law. We have anti-discrimination acts based around someone's attribute being sex or race, or for an Australian with a disability. So the idea that that can also be done for people of strong religious conviction is something that we promised that we would do, and we would do. I might also note, I have the observation this actually became a very significant issue during the election.
Yep.
And a number of people across a great breadth of religious adherents came to me and to others in our government with very serious concerns about some of the directions that we saw Labor attempt to take last year in the Senate, and which they may well have taken if they had won government. So there is a large responsibility in that area with the religious discrimination bill. I think the other point that you raise is that it's very difficult to say that any individual member of executive government has been dismissive or not dismissive of a concept which is exceptionally vague. Now, to the extent that the concept has meant or means, and in my observation it likely does mean, some kind of constitutionally enshrined extra parliamentary process, as you note, members of the executive government and the government itself have rejected that notion. But that doesn't mean that you don't give full consideration to other plans or models and ways in which to recognise Indigenous people in the Australian Constitution. But what we have seen so far from advocates in this area is something which is so vague, it's very, very difficult to say that you are for or against it because of the fact that it is so ill-defined.
Yeah, indeed. It's going to be an ongoing discussion. A lot has been written and said about it, but as you say, we don't have a lot of definition around the actual concept. Just going to something slightly more ridiculous, Christian Porter, you mentioned, it's been reported previously that because you got a swing, a little bet with your electorate staff, because you got a swing to yourself, you're committed to getting a tattoo. Have you done that yet? Have you got the mark of the election on your body yet?
Yeah, not yet. It's a first 100-day promise, Chris, not the... and a core promise, I might add, so it will happen. But, yeah, not the smartest thing I ever did, but not so much a bet as an undertaking to all the people that worked very, very hard for me, that if we increase the margin, I would do something that a lot of people in my electorate have done. So, you know, it'll be followed through. It's a core promise, but give me 100 days.
All right, thanks very much. Appreciate your time, okay. Christian Porter.